Hi guys, this is our final video lesson on prepositions, and today we're going to be looking at dependent prepositions with verbs. So, as you may remember from last week, dependent prepositions can follow verbs, adjectives and also nouns in order to help these verbs, adjectives and nouns to make sense. The verbs, adjectives and nouns depend on the prepositions for their meaning, and that is why these prepositions are called dependent prepositions. So these prepositions cause problems because there are no rules, so you've got nothing to hold on to while you're trying to learn this stuff. And there are just so many dependent prepositions that it can feel like a really big and challenging task. So we're going to look at something called prepositional verbs. Now, sometimes verbs can combine with a preposition to create a new meaning. And when this happens, you have something which is called a prepositional verb. Okay? And I wouldn't worry too much about learning or remembering the name of this. And I wouldn't worry too much about, what's the difference between this and a phrasal verb. We'll just say that there are verbs which are followed by prepositions, and these verbs with prepositions always have to have an object. Okay? So there's 3 examples over here. They decided to look into the problem. Tamsin complained about the bill, and she apologized for losing her temper. So far so good. So sometimes we can use 2 objects, and we can use to before an indirect object, and this is something that often happens with reporting verbs. And if you're not quite sure, reporting verbs are really verbs that are about speaking. So it's words like complain, apologize, believe, all that kind of stuff. We call them reporting verbs. So we've got the same sentences here that we had up here, but now we've got an extra object, and this extra object is following the preposition to. So Tamsin complained to the manager about the bill. She apologized to her boyfriend for losing her temper. Now, there's a little bit more to say about verbs with 2 objects, and here's a little formula up here. Now, if you read the newsletter, this week's newsletter, you'll know that I was talking about formulas and how useful they are for things like questions, and how one of the problems with prepositions is that they don't have this kind of formula. But stuff like this is useful for you. And again, this is particularly useful in learning chunks of language, and I'm going to get back to that in a little bit. So, linking a verb with 2 objects. So, here's an example. The teacher discussed the exam with the students. So that's your verb, first object, second object, preposition in the middle. And another example, Henry explained it to me very carefully. So verb, object 1, preposition, object 2. Now, this is quite interesting down here, and this is a little bit of language that can get a bit confusing sometimes. So there are times when we can change the order of these objects, but when we do that, we need to use different prepositions. So I blame the government for the financial crisis. I blame the financial crisis on the government. And so we've got 2 little formulas here. Blame somebody for something and blame something on somebody. And this is a really important difference. Okay? And another example, the king presented the scientist with the Nobel Prize. The king presented the Nobel Prize to the scientist. And again, we've got a couple of formulas over here. So present somebody with something and present something to somebody. Okay, so this kind of stuff is worth being aware of whenever you can. And we can actually put these verbs into passive voice, but we can only make the direct object the subject in the passive verb. So if we go back to Henry up here, Henry explained it to me very carefully. I was explained it by Henry? No, that one's not really okay. You can't really say this. But this is okay. It was explained to me by Henry. Okay, so this month we have looked at prepositions of time, prepositions of place, prepositions with adjectives, and now prepositions with verbs as well. And the study tips that I gave you include absorbing prepositions from the context around them. So this really, if I had to give you one big study tip, it's this. Use context to learn prepositions, and by context I mean anything from a book to an article to an email. You know, if you're doing business English, emails, nothing wrong with that. Facebook posts, YouTube videos, podcasts, whatever, they all will show you prepositions. Again, learn prepositions with the words they come with, so learn chunks. Don't just try to learn one or two words at the same time. Keep a note of prepositions as you find them one by one by one. This is really important. And one more thing I thought of today is to be patient with yourself. Okay, this is a massive area of English, and it does take time to get this stuff. So there's no point in getting angry and frustrated. But at the same time, you know, you might like to set yourself some goals. So you might like to think, okay, great, this month I'm going to focus on prepositions with verbs, and I'm going to aim to learn 6 new verbs and prepositions every week. And that would be fantastic. So that really brings us to the end of our lovely month of wonderful prepositions. And that means that very soon, quite possibly Friday, I'm going to be collecting ideas about what you want to look at in May. So this could be things like tenses, so perhaps past tenses or future tenses, maybe wonderful conditionals because they're always fun, or perhaps some study skills. So have a little think, and I'll be putting a Facebook poll up in the group probably tomorrow. I do hope these videos have been useful for you, and any questions, any comments, any thoughts, feel free to post in the group. Thanks.